It's not standard practice to subpoena 20% of the Republicans in the Senate and the opposing party. And I'm confident my Democrat colleagues would be really pissed if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded with no basis in fact that the mere fact that they are Democrats demonstrates that they. Senator Hirono can respond, but you can. I'm happy to recognize you to respond, but I would ask you not to interrupt me because I.
This may look like a heated exchange between two senators, but it's actually a referendum on institutional limits. What's really being tested here is whether established legal protections for Congress still hold when prosecutorial power collides with partisan tension. This raises broader questions about separation of powers, precedent, and restraint. In this video, we'll break down how a dispute over subpoenas became a warning sign for democratic accountability.
Great. Thanks, Chairman.
I would note that Professor Vladeck just said if a majority of this committee thinks that senators subject to subpoena should be notified that they could pass the law, well, magically, we used a time machine to do that because Congress passed that into law in 2004. It is in the United States Code. It is black-letter law, and Judge Boasberg disregarded that. Now, he did so at the invitation of Jack Smith, and I would say my Democrat colleague said, well, gosh, it's standard practice not to tell a judge the number you're subpoenaing. It is not standard practice to subpoena 20% of the Republicans in the Senate and the opposing party, and I'm confident my Democrat colleagues would be really pissed if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded with no basis in fact that the mere fact that they are Democrats demonstrates that they. Senator Hirono can respond, but you can. I'm happy to recognize you to respond, but I would ask you not to interrupt me because I am not interrupting you. I am certain my Democrat colleagues would be unhappy if the Trump DOJ. I'm asking you not to interrupt me, Senator Hirono. I did not interrupt you. I am speaking now, and I will recognize you to respond when I conclude in speaking. I am confident my Democrat colleagues would be deeply unhappy if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded the mere fact that they're Democrats means they are likely to be criminals. And I do want to note also, my prediction that no senator would mention Judge Boardman's name proved wrong with the penultimate Democrat speaker. Senator Hirono did mention her name, and 100% of what she said is the decision is on appeal. And I would welcome any of my Democrat colleagues to say that Judge Boardman's decision to deviate downwards by 22 years to reward an attempted assassin of the Supreme Court justice is anything but disgraceful, brazen, and encouraging more political assassinations. To defend it is anything other than a complete dereliction and abuse of her oath of office. Senator Hirono, you're welcome to respond.
You know, you talk about using facts. Well, the law that we refer to is not exactly clear on who bears the responsibility for asking who the heck's records are being subpoenaed. And by the way, if you want to blame somebody for the fact that 20% of Republican senators' records were subpoenaed, you can blame President Trump because he's the one who was calling all of you, or he had his minions calling all of you. So there you go. That's all I have to say.
You know, it is an amazing statement that Democrats now believe that the fact that a member of the Senate speaks to the President of the United States is sufficient to subpoena their phone records and presume they are criminals. Because, Senator, you don't get to say move on because you don't have the gavel. But I will say this. Sad to say, well, perhaps if you hadn't presided over a disastrous economy and an open border and wars across the globe, you might still have the majority, but you don't. And my point is very simple. It is not a criminal conduct to speak with the President of the United States, and it is ludicrous to suggest that it is.
And of course, I didn't make that suggestion, so that's why I'm saying, can we move on with this?
And while we're doing that, since Professor Vladeck mentioned a letter from Director Conrad at the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, I'd offer that letter that he mentioned as an additional exhibit.
The letter will be admitted without objection.
What we just witnessed was not a routine disagreement over procedure. It was a raw, unscripted collision between two fundamentally different views of power, accountability, and the rule of law itself. In that moment, as Senator Ted Cruz pressed his argument and Senator Mazie Hirono pushed back, the room became something more than a hearing room. It became a window into how fragile trust in American institutions has become. At the center of the clash was a simple but unsettling claim that a law already written, already passed, already codified was disregarded by those entrusted to uphold it. Cruz framed the issue not as a technical oversight, but as a conscious choice. A choice that, in his telling, treated legal limits as optional when political interests were at stake. His words were sharp, not merely because of their tone, but because of what they implied. If written law can be brushed aside so easily, then the guardrails meant to protect a constitutional system begin to look alarmingly thin. The exchange quickly moved beyond statutes and subpoenas. It became a debate about fairness. Cruz posed a hypothetical designed to reverse the political roles, asking whether such actions would be tolerated if the parties involved were swapped. It was an appeal to consistency, a demand that standards apply equally, regardless of who holds power in the moment. That question hung in the air, unanswered in any definitive way, and its silence spoke volumes. Senator Hirono's response reflected a different perspective, one that shifted responsibility and reframed the narrative. She challenged the clarity of the law itself and redirected blame toward political leadership rather than judicial or prosecutorial conduct. In doing so, she underscored a reality of modern governance. Accountability is often treated like a movable object, passed from hand to hand until it belongs to no one at all. What makes this moment so revealing is not simply who interrupted whom or whose voice was louder. It is what the argument exposes about a deeper breakdown. The dispute was not over whether rules exist, but over who they bind. When lawmakers cannot agree on that basic principle, the system they oversee begins to feel less like a shared framework and more like a battlefield. There was also something profoundly telling in the emotional undercurrent of the exchange. Beneath the legal arguments and political barbs was a sense of grievance, a belief on both sides that the system is being weaponized against them. That belief, whether justified or not, is corrosive. It turns institutions designed to serve the public into symbols of partisan conflict, and it erodes the shared legitimacy that democracy depends on. This hearing moment reminds us that power is rarely lost in one dramatic collapse. More often, it erodes in increments, through exceptions, justifications, and rationalizations that seem minor in isolation, but devastating in accumulation. Each time rules are bent for convenience or explanations replace accountability, the distance between law and politics grows wider. The American system was built on the idea that no one is above the law, and equally important, that no one is beneath its protection. When senators argue over whether basic communication or political association can be treated as suspicious by default, it signals a dangerous shift. Normal civic functions begin to look like liabilities. Participation itself starts to carry risk. And yet, moments like this also serve another purpose. They strip away polished talking point and reveal the stakes in plain view. They force the public to confront uncomfortable questions about how justice is administered and who decides when lines can be crossed. Transparency, even when messy, is better than silence. What happened in that hearing was not just about past decisions or individual names. It was about precedent, about whether future leaders will inherit a system governed by principle or one ruled by convenience, about whether disagreement is handled through law or through power alone. In a functioning republic, these debates should strengthen institutions by clarifying limits and reinforcing trust. When they devolve into open hostility and mutual suspicion, they instead highlight how much repair is needed. Repair does not begin with slogans or loyalty to parties. It begins with insisting that the same rules apply to everyone, every time. The moment we stop demanding that consistency, we quietly accept a system where outcomes depend not on justice, but on who has the upper hand. History shows us where that path leads, and it is never where citizens are strongest or freest. This is why hearings like this matter. Not because of the headlines they generate, but because of the truths they reveal. They show us the fault lines beneath our institutions and challenge us to decide whether we will ignore them or confront them honestly. If you believe transparency matters, if you believe accountability should not depend on political affiliation, and if you believe the public deserves to see these moments without filters or distortion, then support independent reporting. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and stand with us as we continue to expose the truth and hold power to account.